On the morning of our highly anticipated family trip, I stood at the airline check-in counter and watched the agent's face fall into an expression of deep pity. "Your ticket was canceled at midnight," she told me, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "Your family has already boarded the flight." As I stood there, the noise of the bustling terminal fading into a dull roar, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my sister, accompanied by a photo of her 5-year-old twin boys sitting alone on a cold tile floor near an airport trash bin. "You are the one without a husband or a real career," her text read. "You should be taking care of the kids while Donovan and I enjoy the Caribbean." When she eventually returned from her stolen vacation, the blood would completely drain from her face. She thought she was dumping her responsibilities on a helpless, boring spinster. She had no idea she had just handed a senior financial risk manager the exact legal ammunition needed to dismantle her entire life. My name is Jillian. I am 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the designated disappointment in my family. Growing up in a status-obsessed household in the Chicago suburbs, my parents Harrison and Barbara made it abundantly clear what they valued. They valued appearances, social climbing, and effortless charm. My younger sister Chelsea possessed all three in spades. She was the golden child, a former pageant queen who coasted through life on her looks and manipulative sweetness. I was the quiet, analytical older sister who preferred numbers to networking. While Chelsea was handed cars and paid vacations, I was told to be realistic and pay my own way through college. I built a highly successful career in financial risk management and private investing, but my family never bothered to understand what I actually did. To them, I was just a sad single woman pushing papers at a boring desk job. I had allowed them to believe this fiction because it kept them from asking me for money. I maintained polite boundaries, showing up to the occasional family dinner and tolerating their endless passive-aggressive comments about my lack of a husband. But this trip to the Caribbean was supposed to be a rare moment of family unity, an olive branch my parents had insisted I accept. Instead, it was a carefully orchestrated trap. Standing at the airline counter in Terminal 3 of O'Hare International Airport, the sheer cruelty of the situation washed over me. Chelsea had not just excluded me from the trip, she had actively stranded her own children. The agent asked if I wanted to book a new flight on the next available plane, but I was not listening. My eyes were glued to the photo on my phone. Leo and Liam, my nephews, looking terrified beside a fast food kiosk. A fierce, protective panic instantly replaced my shock. I did not waste time calling Chelsea to scream at her. I knew her phone was already switched to airplane mode. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and began running frantically through the crowded terminal. I pushed past businessmen and vacationing families, scanning every seating area, every food court, every trash bin. My heart pounded against my ribs with a terrifying intensity. Chelsea had left 2 5-year-old boys, completely unsupervised, in one of the busiest airports in the world. I found them near a deserted gate at the end of the concourse. Leo had his thin arms wrapped tightly around his brother Liam, who was quietly sobbing into his shoulder. They looked so small, clutching a single shared backpack. When Leo looked up and saw me, his lower lip trembled, and he abandoned his brave facade. I dropped to my knees on the dirty floor, pulling them both into my arms. They clung to me, burying their faces in my coat, their tears soaking through the fabric. I held them tightly, whispering that they were safe, that Aunt Jillian was here, that everything was going to be perfectly fine. In that moment, on the airport floor, the last remaining thread of loyalty I held for my biological family completely snapped. The walk from the abandoned departure gate to the airport security office felt like moving through a thick fog. I held Leo and Liam tightly by their trembling hands, guiding them through the rushing travelers and rolling suitcases. The boys were unusually quiet, their earlier sobs yielding to silent, exhausted hiccups that only come from profound distress. Every few steps, Liam would look up at me with his tearful face, his fingers gripping mine with desperate strength, terrified I might vanish into the crowd, just like his mother had. I kept my face calm, offering them gentle smiles whenever our eyes met. But beneath that composed exterior, a cold, calculating fury was rapidly taking shape. Chelsea had crossed a line separating mere family dysfunction from actual criminal negligence. Leaving two 5-year-old children unsupervised in a major international airport was not just another one of her antics. It was child abandonment, and I was not going to let her smile her way out of it. The airport security office was a stark, brightly lit room tucked away near the main terminal entrance. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the sudden quiet of the room offered a sharp contrast to the chaotic noise outside. A burly officer sitting behind a high counter looked up from his monitor. His expression shifted from boredom to immediate concern as he took in the sight of my pale, tearful nephews clutching my coat. I carefully guided the boys to a row of waiting chairs along the far wall, handing them a pack of crackers I purchased earlier. Once they were seated and distracted, I approached the counter. I kept my voice low and steady, projecting the professional authority I use daily in corporate boardrooms. "I need to file an official incident report," I told the officer, looking him directly in the eyes. "My sister intentionally abandoned her minor children in the terminal to board an international flight to the Caribbean." The officer blinked, clearly taken aback by the gravity of my statement. He stood up immediately and motioned for another officer to join him. "Are you saying she left them here alone, ma'am?" he asked, his voice dropping to a serious professional register. I placed my phone on the counter, sliding it toward him. I left the screen open to the text message Chelsea sent me, along with the photo she had taken of her children sitting by the trash bin. "She canceled my ticket last night without my knowledge," I explained. "When I arrived at the airport today, I was denied boarding. She sent me this message, stating I should take care of her kids while she goes on vacation with her boyfriend. They were left completely unsupervised at gate B12 for at least 45 minutes. The second officer leaned over to read the text message, a look of genuine disgust crossing his face. "This is incredibly serious, ma'am," he said, reaching for a thick stack of paperwork. "We have to log this as a deliberate abandonment of a minor. Protocol requires us to notify Child Protective Services immediately." "I'm their aunt," I clarified to him, very quickly. "I am more than willing to take temporary emergency custody, but I need this incident officially documented right now." "Before we can process the emergency custody release," the first officer stated, tapping his pen against the desk, "we are legally required to attempt contact with the legal guardians or any immediate next of kin who might currently be on the premises." "Do you know if anyone else from your family is here at the airport?" "My parents are flying out on the same Caribbean trip," I told him, checking my watch. "They are likely sitting in the international business class lounge right now, waiting for their connecting flight. I can give you their cell phone numbers." The officer nodded and picked up the desk phone, punching in the number I provided. He pressed the speaker button, allowing it to echo through the office. I stood still watching the phone as it rang. I knew exactly how my father would react, and I needed the police to hear it firsthand. On the fourth ring, the line opened. "Harrison, what is it?" My father answered, his voice dripping with annoyance. There was background noise, a clinking of glasses, and soft jazz music, indicative of the exclusive lounge. "Mr. Harrison, this is Officer Davis with Chicago Airport Security," the officer began, his tone firm. "We currently have your 2 grandsons, Leo and Liam, in our office. It appears they were left unattended in the terminal. We need you to come down to the security office immediately to take custody of the boys." My father let out a long, exasperated sigh, a sound of pure irritation that I had heard 1,000 times throughout my childhood. "Do not bother us with this right now, officer," he snapped, his voice rising in anger. "I am in the middle of enjoying a pre-flight drink with my wife. Jillian is right there, is she not?" Yes, sir, the aunt is here, but the officer tried to interject. She is family, my father interrupted loudly, cutting the officer off. Let her deal with it today. Chelsea is under a lot of stress and just needs a little break. Jillian does not have a husband or a real job to worry about anyway. She has plenty of free time to play babysitter. Tell her to stop making a big deal out of nothing and take the boys home. We are boarding our flight in 20 minutes and I will not let her ruin this vacation. The line went dead with a sharp click. The two officers stared at the speakerphone in absolute disbelief. The silence in the room was heavy thick with the shocking reality of my father's callous dismissal. I looked at Officer Davis, my expression perfectly composed despite the familiar sting of my parents' rejection. I would like a certified copy of this incident report, I said evenly, breaking the silence. And I would like your official notes to explicitly reflect that both the mother and the grandparents formally refused to take custody of these children when contacted by law enforcement. The officer nodded slowly, his jaw tight with indignation on my behalf. He typed furiously into his terminal, documenting every word of that phone call. By refusing to act, Harrison and Barbara had just handed me the exact legal ammunition I needed. They had helped me lay the first ironclad brick in my legal foundation to protect these children permanently. Once the paperwork was finalized and my emergency guardianship was officially approved, I gathered the twins and walked out of the airport. We bypassed the standard taxi stands and walked toward the reserved executive parking area. Because Chelsea had spent years mocking my quiet lifestyle, my family had convinced themselves I lived in a miserable, tiny room, struggling to make ends meet. They assumed my lack of a husband meant a lack of ambition. When I secured the boys into the back seat of my pristine luxury sedan, their eyes widened in surprise. The drive into downtown Chicago was smooth and quiet. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of an exclusive high-rise building. We rode the private elevator all the way to the top floor. When the polished doors opened directly into my home, I stepped aside to let the boys enter. They walked into a sprawling, sun-drenched penthouse with massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the magnificent city skyline and the sparkling blue expanse of the lake. It was a residence that commanded power and success, completely contradicting the pathetic image my family held of me. I watched the boys stare in awe at their new surroundings, knowing that my sister had made a catastrophic mistake. She thought she was dumping her burdens on a helpless failure. She had no idea she had just declared war on a woman holding all the cards. I stood in the grand foyer of my penthouse, watching Leo and Liam take in the living room. They took off their small sneakers, lining them up by the door. Their hesitant movements broke my heart. Children should not have to tiptoe around their aunt. But Chelsea raised them with conditional affection. I guided them to the massive sofa and draped a cashmere blanket over their shoulders. I asked what they wanted to eat, and Liam requested grilled cheese. I walked into my custom kitchen. As I grated fresh cheddar, I kept an eye on them. They were huddled together, watching the city lights flicker outside the windows. The airport trauma was still fresh on their pale faces, but the apartment was doing its work. I brought them warm bowls of food and sat at the kitchen island. I did not ask about their mother. We talked about the boats on Lake Michigan. By the time they finished eating, their eyes were drooping with profound exhaustion. I led them to the guest suite, a room I designed for comfort with blackout curtains and plush bedding. I helped them change into oversized t-shirts of mine. I tucked them into the enormous bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to their chins. I told them they were completely safe, and I would be right down the hall. I left the door cracked open, allowing a sliver of warm light to spill across the floor. Once the rhythmic sound of their breathing assured me they were asleep, I turned away from the bedroom. The soft aunt they needed for the past few hours vanished. In her place emerged the woman who handled multi-million-dollar risk portfolios for a living. I walked down the long corridor toward my home office, locking the heavy oak door behind me. I flicked a switch and my workspace came to life. 3 curved monitors glowed against the dark walls, illuminating a wide desk. My family believed I was a lonely data entry clerk, wasting my life in a gray cubicle. They constructed an entire narrative around my perceived mediocrity because it made them feel better about their own chaotic choices. They did not know I was a senior financial risk manager for one of the largest private equity firms in the country. They did not know my daily routine involved identifying vulnerabilities, tracking fraudulent asset transfers, and dismantling corporate schemes. Chelsea decided to play a game of deception with someone who hunted liars for a living. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and placed my hands on the keyboard. First, I needed to understand exactly how Chelsea had orchestrated the cancellation of my ticket. I pulled up a secure browser and logged into my frequent flyer account. I bypassed the standard customer-facing dashboard and accessed the detailed transaction history. The airline system showed that my reservation to the Caribbean had been formally canceled at exactly 14 minutes past midnight. The cancellation had been done entirely online through the airline's mobile application. That meant Chelsea somehow gained access to my secure login credentials. I leaned forward, analyzing the digital access logs. The IP address associated with the cancellation traced back to the residential internet provider at my parents' house, where Chelsea had been staying. She likely watched me enter my password during one of our recent family dinners. But the cancellation was only the beginning of the digital trail. When a ticket is canceled, the airline issues a flight credit. I navigated to the wallet section of my account, expecting to see the credited funds sitting there. The balance was 0. My eyes narrowed as I searched for the missing funds. I pulled the routing data for the flight credit. The system indicated that the credit had been immediately applied to 2 existing reservations on the same outbound flight. Chelsea had transferred my funds to upgrade her own ticket and the ticket of her boyfriend Donovan from standard economy to international first class. But the math did not add up. My single economy ticket credit would not cover the massive price difference for 2 international first-class upgrades. There had to be a secondary funding source. I pulled the detailed payment receipt for the upgrade transaction. The airline receipt displayed the flight credit being applied, followed by a secondary payment for the remaining balance of $4,200. The payment method was listed as a premium corporate credit card. The last 4 digits displayed on the screen were numbers I recognized immediately. It was my backup corporate expense card. A cold wave of realization washed over me. Chelsea had not just locked me out of a family vacation. She had committed felony credit card theft. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my leather wallet. I flipped through the card slots. My primary cards were all there, but the heavy metal corporate card I kept tucked in the very back slot was missing. Chelsea had stolen it directly from my purse. She likely slipped it out of my bag while I was helping my mother clear the table during Sunday dinner. She knew I rarely used that specific card and assumed I would not notice it missing until her vacation was over. She assumed I would just cry about being left behind and passively accept the financial loss to keep the peace in the family. She was wrong. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the priority line for my bank's corporate fraud division. Because of my high net worth status, I did not have to navigate menus or wait on hold. The line rang twice before a dedicated senior representative answered. "Good evening, Miss Jillian," the representative said, his voice crisp and professional. "How can I assist you tonight?" "I need to report a compromised card on my corporate account," I told him, keeping my tone conversational. "The card ending in 4 specific digits has been physically stolen." The representative immediately shifted into protocol. "I am very sorry to hear that, Miss Jillian. I will cancel that card right now and issue a replacement. We will also begin the chargeback process for any unauthorized transactions." "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Do not cancel the card yet. Leave it active." I could hear the confusion in the representative's silence. Ma'am, if we leave the card active, the unauthorized user will continue to accumulate charges. That is exactly what I want them to do, I explained, staring at the digital map of the Caribbean displayed on my center monitor. However, I want you to place a real-time fraud tracking monitor on the account. I want an immediate, direct alert sent to my phone the absolute second that card is swiped anywhere in the world. I want the merchant data, the location, and the exact amount of every single transaction. The representative paused, clearly recognizing the strategic nature of my request. You are building a comprehensive fraud case, he noted. Exactly, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. If I cancel the card now, the thief will merely face a minor inconvenience at a hotel check-in desk. They will pretend it was a bank error and find another way to pay. But if I let them use it to fund a luxury international vacation over the next few days, the charges will quickly elevate from simple petty theft to a major financial felony. I want to see exactly how much money she intends to steal before I snap the trap shut. Understood, Miss Gillian, the representative said, his tone conveying deep respect. The real-time tracking protocol is now active on the card. You will receive notifications instantly. I thanked him and ended the call, setting the phone gently on my desk. I leaned back in my chair and watched the glowing screens in the darkened room. My sister was currently flying toward a luxury resort, believing she had executed the perfect crime against a helpless victim. She thought she was heading to paradise. She had no idea she was flying directly into a financial and legal slaughterhouse that I was currently designing, brick by brick. The first morning after the airport abandonment began before sunrise. I found Leo standing outside my bedroom in the oversized shirt I had given him, one hand wrapped around the doorframe. He did not ask for anything, he only wanted to make sure I was still there. Liam appeared behind him moments later, rubbing his eyes. I brought them into the kitchen and made pancakes while they watched every movement. Neither boy touched the full plates until I took a bite from mine. That hesitation told me more about their home life than any accusation Chelsea could have made. I kept the morning quiet. I found an animated movie, placed blankets on the sofa, and gave the boys permission to eat as much fruit as they wanted. They were halfway through the movie when my phone began vibrating across the kitchen counter. The screen displayed a video call from my mother. I stared at the name for several seconds before answering. I did not accept the call because I wanted comfort or an explanation. I accepted because people like my parents revealed the most when they believed they were speaking to someone too weak to challenge them. Barbara's face appeared against a dazzling background of blue water and white stone. She was sitting beneath a shaded terrace at the Azure Pearl, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a porcelain cup. Behind her, my father reclined in a resort chair with a newspaper spread across his knees. Neither of them looked frightened, ashamed, or concerned about the two 5-year-old children they had left behind. They looked mildly inconvenienced. "There you are," my mother said, as though I had kept her waiting for a lunch reservation. "Why did you involve airport security yesterday? Your father and I had to spend the entire flight dealing with messages from people asking whether there had been some kind of emergency." "There was an emergency," I replied. "Chelsea abandoned Leo and Liam in a public terminal and boarded an international flight." Barbara removed her sunglasses and gave me the same exhausted expression she used whenever I refused to accept an obvious lie. "Gillian, do not turn this into one of your dramatic legal situations. The boys were never in danger. Chelsea knew you were coming to the airport. She arranged for you to collect them. That is not abandonment. It is family helping family. She canceled my ticket without telling me I said. She left them alone beside a trash bin and sent me a photograph after she had already gone through security." My father lowered his newspaper. His face tightened with irritation rather than concern. "And yet the children are perfectly safe," he said. "You found them. The arrangement worked. Why are you determined to make your sister look like a criminal over a minor misunderstanding?" Because leaving 2 children alone in one of the busiest airports in the country is a crime, I answered. Airport security documented it. Child Protective Services has been notified. Your refusal to return for them was documented as well. Harrison sat forward so quickly that his newspaper slid onto the terrace floor. You had no right to drag our names into some government file, he snapped. We were minutes from boarding. We had already paid for the trip. Your mother and I were not going to lose thousands of dollars because Chelsea changed the childcare arrangement at the last minute. I glanced toward the living room. Leo and Liam were still watching the movie, but Leo had turned his head slightly toward my voice. I lowered the volume of the call and walked into my office, closing the door without locking it. On my desk, I opened the recording application I used for compliance interviews. Illinois law and the circumstances of the ongoing child protection matter made documentation essential, but I also told them plainly that the call was being preserved for the case file. My mother waved the warning away. Preserve whatever you like, she said. Chelsea is exhausted. Raising twins has been demanding, especially while she is planning a future with a successful man. She deserves several peaceful days with Donovan. You are 34, unmarried, and living alone. You have no husband, no children, and no serious obligations outside that little office job. Consider this practice. Most women would be grateful for the chance to learn motherhood before it is too late. The casual cruelty of her words was almost impressive. She had transformed child abandonment into a favor to me. She had reduced the boy's fear to an unpaid training exercise and my career to a hobby. I kept my expression neutral because anger would only encourage her to perform for my father. What exactly do you believe I do for a living? I asked. Harrison laughed from behind her. You count numbers for people who make the real decisions, he said. You review forms, identify little mistakes, and tell executives whether their paperwork is complete. It is respectable clerical work, Jillian, but do not confuse access to spreadsheets with actual power. Barbara smiled as if he had offered a gentle correction. Donovan operates on an entirely different level, she said. He is discussing billion-dollar projects with international partners, while you are worrying about receipts and compliance checklists. Chelsea finally has a man who can give her and the boys the life they deserve. The least you can do is support that relationship, instead of trying to sabotage it because you are jealous. Billion-dollar projects, I repeated. Exactly, my father said. Offshore funds, private acquisitions, resort developments, things you would not understand. Donovan spent half of dinner last week explaining his investment strategy, and even I could see that he thinks on a global scale. You should listen to him sometime. You might learn the difference between processing numbers and creating wealth. I thought about the premium corporate card missing from my wallet, the flight upgrades charged to my account, and the live fraud monitor now waiting for Chelsea's first purchase on the island. My parents were admiring a man whose vacation had been funded by stolen credit. Their certainty was not merely foolish, it was evidence of how desperately they needed appearances to be true. Where is Chelsea now? I asked. At the spa, Barbara replied. Donovan booked a private treatment for them because she was so upset by the chaos you caused. Please do not call her. She needs to remain calm and focused on her engagement. Does she intend to speak to her children? My mother hesitated. Not today. Hearing them cry would only make her feel guilty, and she cannot enjoy the trip if you keep forcing unpleasant emotions on her. For the first time, my composure nearly broke. I looked through the glass panel in my office door and saw Liam holding a stuffed cushion against his chest. The child had awakened in a strange home, afraid that every adult might disappear while his mother was avoiding his voice because guilt might interfere with a spa appointment. I need both of you to answer one question clearly, I said. Are you asking me to keep Leo and Liam for the entire duration of this trip while Chelsea refuses direct contact with them? Of course we are, Harrison said. Stop making us repeat ourselves. Keep the boys, do not contact the resort, and do not create any more official reports. When we return, Chelsea will collect them and everyone will move on. And if I refuse, then you will prove once again that you care more about rules than family, Barbara said. We will tell everyone what you did. Your relatives already think you are cold and difficult. Do not give them another reason to exclude you. I let the silence sit long enough for the recording to capture every word. Then I asked whether either of them wanted to know if the boys had eaten, slept, or required medical care. Neither answered immediately. My father finally said that I was being melodramatic. My mother asked whether I had packed the blue sweaters Chelsea liked them to wear in photographs. That was the moment the call stopped being painful. Their indifference became useful. I thanked them for clarifying their position and ended the connection before they could issue another command. The recording file saved automatically with the date, time, and participant information. I duplicated it to an encrypted drive attached to a written summary and sent both items to the secure folder I had opened for the CPS investigation. I sat alone in the blue light of my monitors and considered the name my parents repeated with such reverence. Donovan. The supposed visionary who discussed billion-dollar acquisitions. His language at family dinners had always sounded polished but hollow. And now he was staying at an expensive Caribbean resort, using a card stolen from me. I opened a new secure browser window and accessed my firm's corporate intelligence portal. The search field waited in the center of the screen. I typed his full name slowly, letter by letter. Donovan Pierce. With the credit card trap firmly set and the real-time alerts fully activated, I slowly turned my attention to the next piece of this chaotic puzzle. Chelsea had spent the last 2 very long months boasting to our parents about her new fiancé Donovan. She painted him as a wildly successful venture capitalist, a man who supposedly managed offshore hedge funds and spent his weekends racing vintage sports cars. My father had practically drooled over the stories, eager to finally have a wealthy son-in-law he could brag about at his exclusive country club. My mother had weaponized Donovan's fabricated success against me, asking why I could not find a sophisticated man like him instead of focusing on my boring spreadsheets. They constantly reminded me that Chelsea was building a glamorous life while I was destined to die alone, surrounded by financial reports. But something about Donovan had always bothered me from the very first moment he stepped into my parents' house. During the few brief occasions I was forced to interact with him at family dinners, his financial jargon felt incredibly rehearsed. He used buzzwords that sounded impressive to lay people but lacked any actual substance. He talked about disruptive market synergies and aggressive portfolio leveraging without ever naming a specific asset class. Real wealth is usually quiet and observant. Donovan was incredibly loud, constantly name-dropping and flashing a heavily logoed designer watch. I knew the signs of a grifter. I opened a new, secure window on my center monitor and accessed my firm's proprietary corporate intelligence database. This was a sophisticated system, restricted to senior directors compiling global financial records, background checks, litigation histories, and international corporate registry data. I typed the name Donovan Pierce into the search bar. The initial public records returned exactly what I expected. He had a carefully curated social media presence, a flashy professional profile claiming executive positions at boutique investment firms, and a few generic press releases about market strategies. It was a beautiful facade, designed to fool people exactly like my parents and my sister. I bypassed the public records and dug into the restricted corporate filings, diving deep into the actual shell companies he listed on his resume. The picture that emerged was not just pathetic, it was highly illegal. Donovan Pierce was not a venture capitalist. He was a professional con artist running a textbook Ponzi scheme. The offshore hedge funds he bragged about were nothing more than empty shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, completely devoid of actual assets. I pulled his credit reports and civil litigation history. The screen filled with red flags. Donovan was currently drowning in over $3 million of outstanding debt. He had multiple severe civil judgments against him from previous investors who had realized their money was gone. There were active eviction notices on his previous luxury apartments, and his prized sports car was actually a short-term lease that was currently 3 months past due. He was bleeding cash and desperate for a lifeline. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the money trail. The situation was actually much worse than a simple con. I ran his name through my own firm's internal compliance registry. A bright red warning banner flashed across my screen. Donovan Pierce was currently on our active corporate blacklist. My firm was in the preliminary stages of assisting a federal financial task force with a wide-scale investigation into his fraudulent wire transfers. He was weeks, maybe days, away from a massive federal indictment. I let out a low, humorless laugh that echoed in the quiet office. Chelsea thought she had landed a whale who would fund her lavish lifestyle forever. In reality, she had attached herself to a sinking anchor. Donovan was totally broke, using her as a temporary gold mine to pay for his meals, his clothes, and his flights while he plotted his next move. My sister, who prided herself on using people, had just become the ultimate mark for a desperate criminal. My phone buzzed on the glass desk, bringing me back to the immediate situation. It was not a fraud alert from the bank yet. It was a social media notification. I opened the application and saw that Chelsea had just posted a new update. She had connected to the expensive in-flight wireless network and uploaded a highly filtered selfie from the first-class cabin. She was holding a glass of complimentary champagne, leaning her head against Donovan's shoulder. The caption was dripping with her usual brand of toxic superiority. It read, "Leaving the cold weather and the boring people behind. Next stop, paradise with my amazing man." Some people are just meant for the luxury life. She had tagged her location as en route to the Azure Pearl Resort and Spa. I scrolled down and saw that my mother had already commented on the photo. "Have a wonderful time, sweetie. You deserve to be spoiled after working so hard." I stared at the screen, feeling a complex mix of pity and absolute disgust. She was drinking expensive champagne paid for with my stolen credit card, sitting next to a man who was actively scamming her. Meanwhile, her 2 young children were currently sleeping down the hall in my guest room because she had abandoned them like pieces of unwanted luggage at a crowded airport. The sheer audacity of her post fueled my determination to see this through to the absolute end. I decided to take a much closer look at their intended destination. The Azure Pearl was widely known in elite circles as one of the most exclusive and outrageously expensive ultra-luxury resorts in the entire Caribbean. It catered specifically to international celebrities, wealthy politicians, and ultra-high net worth individuals. A standard room cost over $2,000 a night, and the premium penthouse suites went for exponentially more. It featured private butlers, exclusive beach access, and Michelin star dining. It was the perfect place for a fake millionaire to pretend he had endless resources. It was also the absolute worst place to be if your credit card suddenly declined. I turned my attention back to the computer screens and opened a fresh search terminal. I wanted to see the exact corporate structure of the Azure Pearl to understand their billing policies and security procedures. I needed to know exactly how aggressive the resort management would be when I eventually flagged the credit card transactions as fraudulent. I pulled the international property records and traced the hospitality management group that operated the resort. The management group was a subsidiary of a much larger international holding company. As I followed the corporate ownership tree upward through layers of holding companies and limited liability partnerships, the names of the parent entities began to look surprisingly familiar to me. I accessed the global registry of private equity assets to find the ultimate parent company that owned the physical real estate of the Azure Pearl Resort. When the final corporate deed loaded onto my high-resolution screen, I froze completely. I took a sharp breath, leaning forward to read the digital document a second time, just to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The ultra-luxury resort was wholly owned by a private equity holding fund named Vanguard Horizon Partners. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding with a sudden euphoric thrill. Vanguard Horizon Partners was a highly lucrative private investment fund I had personally structured 4 years ago. And through a complex, carefully constructed web of anonymous trusts, I held a 65% controlling ownership stake in that exact fund. For years, my parents had looked down on my career choices, treating my demanding corporate life as if it were just a temporary phase. They constantly reminded me that working late nights analyzing risk portfolios would never yield the social status they so desperately craved. They worshipped the illusion of wealth, but they completely failed to recognize the immense and undeniable power of holding actual capital. They thought my quiet demeanor was a symptom of personal failure and absolute weakness. They never stopped to consider that I was silently acquiring the very institutions they idolized and building an unshakable empire in the shadows. I read the official legal filings again, letting the magnificent reality of the impossible situation wash over me completely. My toxic sister had actively stolen my credit card to fly to an outrageously expensive luxury resort to escape her responsibilities and mock my quiet life. But she had absolutely no idea that her pristine tropical paradise was actually my personal property. She was checking into a luxury hotel where I was quite literally the majority owner and the ultimate undisputed boss of every single person working there. I stared quietly at the glowing screen as a profound, satisfying sense of poetic justice settled deep in my chest. I now had the immense, undeniable power to completely dismantle her entire, perfect vacation with just a single swift and absolutely devastating phone call to my loyal hotel management staff. I picked up the heavy receiver of my secure office phone. I glanced toward the secondary monitor displaying the live feed from the hallway camera outside my guest bedroom. Through the cracked door, I could see the steady rise and fall of the twins' breathing under the thick duvet. They were exhausted, traumatized, and completely abandoned by the woman currently bragging about her luxury lifestyle on the internet. Any lingering trace of sisterly hesitation vanished entirely. I punched in the international dial code, followed by the private direct line for the executive director of the Azure Pearl Resort and Spa. The line rang only once before a crisp, professional voice answered the call. Executive Office, Victor speaking. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass desk. Victor, this is Jillian. I need to initiate an immediate executive override for a current guest. He had managed the property for 3 years and knew exactly who I was. Miss Jillian, it is an absolute honor to hear from you, he said. Please provide your secure clearance authorization code so I can access the master system. I recited the sequence without missing a single beat. Rapid typing echoed through the phone, followed by a soft chime confirming my authority over the network. I am in the system, Miss Jillian. What is the specific issue we are facing today? I pulled up the social media photo Chelsea had posted. I need you to locate the reservation for a Chelsea and a Donovan. They arrived on the island less than 2 hours ago. I have them right here, Victor confirmed. They are checked into the premium oceanfront penthouse suite. They requested the luxury airport transfer via private helicopter and have ordered several expensive amenities to the room. They provided a premium corporate credit card for incidentals. I smiled a cold and humorless expression. That corporate credit card belongs to me, Victor. It was physically stolen from my purse yesterday afternoon. The woman accompanying that man is my sister, operating under the delusion that she can fund a luxury vacation using my stolen assets. I am so terribly sorry, Miss Jillian, Victor stammered. I will dispatch resort security to the penthouse suite immediately and have them forcefully escorted from the property. No, I commanded, my voice remaining perfectly level. Do not send security to their room just yet. I do not want them quietly escorted out the back door. I want this handled with maximum visibility. Cancel every single VIP privilege attached to that reservation I instructed. Deactivate their room keys. Revoke their access to the private beach club, the spa, and the exclusive dining areas. I want their account locked entirely. They are no longer permitted to charge anything to the room. When they attempt to make a purchase, they must present the physical credit card to the staff, and when they do, I want the card to be declined publicly. I want the merchant system to flag it as suspected fraud right in front of them. Victor understood perfectly. The privileges are being revoked as we speak, Miss Gillian. Their room folios are locked. The physical card must be swiped for any future transactions, and our point-of-sale terminals are directly linked to the global fraud registry. If your bank has placed a monitor on that card, our machines will trigger a hard decline immediately. Furthermore, I need you to generate a comprehensive invoice for every single expense they have incurred since stepping foot on your property. I want the total sum calculated immediately. Once their card is publicly declined, I want your senior management team to present them with the physical bill. Inform them that the card on file has been flagged as stolen by the issuing bank and demand immediate payment in full using an alternative method. If they cannot produce the funds, you will inform them that local police will be notified of the international fraud. Understood completely, Victor said. We will handle this with the utmost precision. I ended the call and leaned back watching the digital clock on my monitor tick forward. The financial trap was fully armed and ready to snap shut completely. While I sat in the cool silence of my Chicago penthouse, my sister was lounging comfortably under the blazing Caribbean sun. The Azure Pearl Resort featured pristine white sand beaches melting into crystal clear turquoise water. Chelsea was stretched out on a plush white lounger inside a private beachfront cabana, wearing a designer swimsuit she had undoubtedly purchased with my money. She adjusted her expensive sunglasses and gazed out at the gentle rolling waves, feeling an overwhelming sense of toxic superiority. In her twisted mind, she had finally achieved the glamorous life she always deserved. She had successfully escaped the mundane responsibilities of motherhood, dumping her young twins on her boring older sister without a single shred of guilt. She imagined me sitting in my supposedly pathetic apartment, crying over my canceled ticket, while she lived like royalty. Beside her, Donovan was sipping a colorful tropical cocktail and complaining to a passing attendant. He was performing the role of a demanding billionaire, oblivious to the fact that his entire financial existence was a fragile house of cards. Chelsea admired him, genuinely believing she had secured a wealthy provider who would elevate her social status above everyone else in our family. She reached over and rested her hand on his knee, feeling untouchable. The warm tropical breeze ruffled the sheer white curtains of their cabana, creating a picturesque scene of ultimate luxury. But the illusion was about to shatter with devastating force. Chelsea decided that lounging by the water was simply not enough. She wanted to document her elevated status, making everyone incredibly jealous of her glamorous lifestyle. She spotted a uniformed resort server walking along the pristine beach, carrying a silver tray. She sat up, waving her hand imperiously to grab his attention. The server, a polite and impeccably trained young man, approached their private cabana with a respectful bow. "We are celebrating our arrival," she announced loudly, ensuring the wealthy guests in the neighboring cabanas could hear her. "I want a bottle of your absolute finest vintage champagne, the Dom Perignon Rosé. Bring it with 2 crystal flutes and some fresh strawberries immediately." The server maintained his professional smile, but he had already received the urgent internal memo from the executive office regarding the occupants of Penthouse Suite 702. "Certainly, madam," the server replied. "That particular vintage is quite exclusive and retails for $2,000. Because your room charging privileges have been temporarily suspended by our management, I will need you to provide a physical credit card." Chelsea's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot a confused look at Donovan, who simply shrugged and adjusted his sunglasses. Suspended, she repeated, her voice taking on a sharp, defensive edge. There must be some kind of ridiculous mistake. We are staying in the premium penthouse suite. Our card is already on file at the front desk. The server offered a highly practiced, apologetic nod. I understand, madam, but our system requires a physical swipe for premium purchases when the room folio is locked. It is merely a security precaution for our valued guests. I can process the payment right here with my mobile terminal. Fine, she snapped, reaching into her designer beach bag. She pulled out her wallet and extracted my heavy corporate credit card. She held it out, treating the server with absolute disdain. Just run it and bring the champagne, quickly. The server accepted the stolen card and retrieved a sleek black mobile point-of-sale terminal from his apron pocket. He inserted the thick metal card into the chip reader and entered the $2,000 charge for the vintage champagne. Chelsea leaned back against her plush lounger, preparing to take a selfie while she waited. Donovan watched the server, expecting the transaction to clear instantly. But the machine did not produce a printed receipt. Instead, the terminal emitted a loud, sharp error beep that cut through the soothing sounds of the ocean waves. The digital screen on the device flashed a bright, glaring crimson red. The server looked down at the glowing red screen and then looked back up at Chelsea. The neighboring guests who had been trying to relax in the adjacent cabanas turned their heads to see what was causing the disruptive noise. I am terribly sorry, madam, the server said, his voice carrying across the quiet beach. The transaction has been completely declined. Chelsea sat up quickly, her face flushing with immediate embarrassment. That is impossible, she hissed, snatching her hand forward. You must have done it wrong. Run it again. The machine is broken. The server did not attempt to run the card a second time. He held the mobile terminal up so she could clearly read the bold white letters flashing across the bright red background. The machine is functioning perfectly, madam, he stated, his voice losing its deferential warmth and adopting a strict, clinical tone. The issuing bank has issued a hard decline on this account. The message states that this card has been reported stolen. The system is showing a suspected fraud alert. We are required to confiscate this card immediately, and management is requesting your presence at the front desk to settle your outstanding balance of $28,000 before we contact the local authorities. At the same instant the server announced the suspected fraud alert, my phone vibrated against the glass desk in Chicago. The bank's monitoring system had captured the attempted $2,000 charge, the merchant identification number, the exact terminal on the Azure Pearl Beach, and the digital notation that resort staff had retained the physical card. I saved the alert to the evidence folder and forwarded a copy to Mitchell, even though I had not yet told him the full shape of the case. The transaction connected the stolen card in my possession records to Chelsea's hand on foreign soil. It was no longer a story she could dismiss as a family misunderstanding. A second call arrived less than a minute later. Victor's name appeared on the secure line. I answered and heard controlled activity behind his voice, a radio transmission, the clipped instructions of security staff, and the distant sound of surf. The public decline occurred exactly as authorized, he reported. The server confiscated the card after the terminal identified it as stolen. Your sister is demanding that we return it and run the charge again. Mr. Donovan is claiming he can have the entire management team dismissed. Several guests witnessed the exchange. Preserve the point-of-sale record and the security footage, I said. I want the original files stored without editing with timestamps and chain of custody notes. Have the server write a statement while the details are fresh. Already underway, Victor replied. The current verified balance is $28,000, including the helicopter transfer, the penthouse deposit, meals, spa reservations, and the bottle they attempted to purchase. Neither guest has presented a valid alternative payment method. How would you like me to proceed? I opened the resort's encrypted security portal on my center monitor. As majority owner, I had access to live operational feeds, but I selected only the cameras relevant to the active fraud incident and authorized Victor to preserve them for legal review. The beach image appeared in high definition. Chelsea was upright on the lounger, one hand extended toward the server. Donovan stood beside her, his body angled aggressively, while nearby guests pretended not to watch. "Do not argue with them through junior staff," I said. "Take control of the confrontation yourself. Bring 2 security officers present the itemized invoice and explain that the cardholder has confirmed the card was stolen. Give them one opportunity to provide lawful payment. If they cannot escort them to the suite, deactivate their keys, secure their luggage, and notify the local financial crimes unit. Do not allow them to leave the property with evidence or charge another item to the room." Victor paused. "Understood. Would you like us to announce your ownership interest, or identify you as the reporting cardholder?" "Not yet," I said. Chelsea has spent her life escaping consequences by changing the subject to me. Keep the focus on her conduct. She used a stolen card. She owes the resort money. She either pays or answers to the authorities. My identity is irrelevant until I decide otherwise. There was a quiet note of approval in Victor's reply. "We will proceed now." I watched him end the call on the live feed. He left the shaded management station carrying a leather folio containing the invoice. 2 broad-shouldered security officers joined him near the path to the private cabanas. The 3 of them moved across the white sand with the deliberate pace of people who already possessed every fact they needed. Chelsea was still berating the server when Victor and the officers entered the frame. I watched the live video feed as Victor approached the cabana, accompanied by 2 towering security officers dressed in crisp white uniforms. Even without audio, the security footage painted a perfectly clear picture of the confrontation. Victor stood tall and presented a sleek leather folder to Donovan. Chelsea looked up with a confused and annoyed expression, clearly wondering why the executive director was interrupting her perfect beach day. Donovan took the folder and opened it. I watched his posture stiffen immediately. The artificial confidence he carried himself with evaporated in a single second. He looked up at Victor and began gesturing wildly, clearly arguing about the charges. The 2 security officers stepped forward, closing the distance and crossing their muscular arms. Chelsea sat up quickly, setting her champagne flute down on the small table. She reached into her expensive beach bag and pulled out her wallet, retrieving my stolen corporate card. She tried to hand it to Victor, insisting he just charge the card again. Victor shook his head and gestured toward the main hotel building. He was instructing them to return to their room. Donovan stood up, his face flushed red with sudden anger. He grabbed his shirt and began marching aggressively toward the hotel lobby, leaving Chelsea scrambling to gather her belongings and chase after him. I switched the camera feed to the 7th floor corridor, watching as the group emerged from the elevator. Victor and the security guards escorted them directly to penthouse suite 702. Once they were inside the lavish room, I knew exactly what was happening. Victor was presenting them with the undeniable reality of their situation. I checked the financial terminal on my other screen to see the exact amount Victor had calculated for their brief but extravagant stay. The total outstanding balance was exactly $28,000. 10 minutes later, Victor called my direct line. "The situation is contained, Miss Gillian," he reported smoothly. "I presented them with the final invoice for $28,000. I informed them that the corporate card was flagged as stolen and demanded immediate alternative payment." "How did they react?" I asked, keeping my eyes glued to the security feed outside their door. "The man, Donovan, became incredibly belligerent," Victor explained. "He attempted to claim that he was a wealthy venture capitalist and that this was merely a temporary banking error. When I informed him that the local authorities would be arriving shortly to investigate the fraudulent charges, his entire demeanor changed. He turned on your sister immediately. He started screaming at her, calling her a pathetic liar and a broke fraud. He told her she was trying to act rich without having a single dime to her name. He completely threw her under the bus to save himself. I felt a deep surge of satisfaction. Donovan's true cowardly nature had been completely exposed under pressure. He was a broke con artist, drowning in $3 million of debt, and the moment he realized Chelsea could not actually fund his luxury lifestyle, he discarded her without a second thought. "And my sister?" I asked, curious to hear how her perfect vacation was crumbling. "She is currently in a state of absolute hysterical panic," Victor replied. She attempted to produce 2 other personal credit cards, but both were declined for insufficient funds. She is currently sobbing on the sofa and begging us not to call the local police. She claims she can get the money from her family back in the United States if we just give her a few hours to make some phone calls. I smiled at the glowing monitors. "Give her the phone, Victor," I instructed. "Let her call our parents. I want her to realize that nobody is coming to save her from the consequences of her own actions. Lock down the penthouse suite and post a security guard outside the door. Do not let them leave the room until the police arrive or the bill is settled in full." "Thank you, Victor. You have executed this flawlessly." I ended the call and leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands. The carefully constructed illusion my sister had built was entirely shattered. The glamorous getaway she had orchestrated by abandoning her children and stealing my assets had turned into a terrifying tropical nightmare. Chelsea was currently trapped in a luxury penthouse with a furious con artist who despised her, facing a massive hotel bill she could never afford to pay, and the very real threat of going to a foreign prison for credit card fraud. She had spent her entire life skating by on her looks and her ability to manipulate our enabling parents. She always believed she was untouchable because our mother and father constantly protected her from the reality of her terrible decisions. But they could not protect her from this. They could not magically erase a $28,000 hotel bill or make international fraud charges simply disappear. I sat in the quiet glow of my home office, waiting for the inevitable outcome. My phone rested silently on the desk, but I knew it would not remain silent for much longer. Chelsea was going to exhaust every single option she had. She was going to call our parents, begging and pleading for a financial rescue package. She was going to spin a desperate web of lies, claiming she was a victim of a horrible misunderstanding. And when our parents realized the sheer magnitude of the debt, they were going to panic. They were going to look for someone to fix the mess, and they would undoubtedly turn their attention back to the daughter they had spent years dismissing. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the walls were closing in on my sister. All I had to do now was wait for my phone to ring. The shrill tone of my cell phone pierced the quiet office. I took a deliberate breath and pressed the green button. "Jillian, you need to wire $30,000 to your sister's bank account immediately." My mother's voice blared, devoid of any polite preamble. Her tone was frantic, but laced with heavy entitlement. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding with the banks in the Caribbean, and Chelsea's accounts have been frozen. She is stranded at some hotel, and they are being incredibly unreasonable about a security deposit. She is in tears, Jillian. You need to fix this right now." I leaned back. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "Mom, she is not dealing with a banking error. She tried to fund a luxury vacation using a stolen corporate credit card. She stole it from my purse during Sunday dinner." My mother let out an exasperated sigh, brushing past my accusation. "Oh, do not be dramatic, Jillian," she snapped. "You know how Chelsea is with money. She probably just grabbed the wrong card by accident. Right now, your sister is trapped in a foreign country, and the hotel management is threatening to involve the local police over a billing dispute. Send the money this instant. We will pay you back next week." Faced with the undeniable reality of Chelsea's blatant criminal behavior, my mother was still instinctively leaping to shield her golden child. "She did not grab the wrong card by accident," I stated, my voice dropping to a rigid register. She deliberately stole my corporate card to upgrade her flights and used it to order vintage champagne. And she did all of this after intentionally abandoning her 5-year-old twins at a crowded airport terminal. Have you forgotten that you explicitly refused to come back for them when airport security called you? My mother scoffed a sound of pure toxic dismissal. The boys are perfectly fine with you, Jillian, she insisted. Chelsea needed a romantic getaway to secure her relationship with Donovan. He is a wealthy man and she needs to impress him. You are trying to ruin her happiness because you are jealous. Now stop acting like a selfish child and wire the $30,000. It is the least you can do to save the family honor. If those hotel people arrest her, it will be a humiliating scandal for all of us. I am not sending her a single dime, I replied, my tone absolute and final. I will not fund a criminal who abandons her children. Let Donovan pay the bill. You said he was a wealthy investor. The line went silent before I heard the phone being aggressively snatched away. When the next voice spoke, it was my father, Harrison. Listen to me very carefully, young lady, he growled, his anger vibrating through the speaker. You will do exactly as your mother told you to do right this second. I will not tolerate this insolent behavior from you anymore. You have always been a bitter, jealous disappointment to this family. I remained perfectly still. Is that right, Dad? I asked quietly. I am a disappointment because I refuse to bail out a thief? You are a disappointment because you do not understand the value of family loyalty, he shouted, his temper flaring. You sit in your sad little cubicle crunching numbers all day, and you think you know how the real world works? You know nothing. If you do not wire that money right now, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. I will formally disinherit you. I will strike your name from my will completely. I will ban you from our house, and I will make sure every relative we have knows exactly how you abandoned your own flesh and blood. You will be dead to this family, Jillian. I listened to his furious breathing. He truly believed he held the ultimate leverage over my life. He believed his suburban wealth and his hollow threats of disinheritance would bring me to my knees, begging for forgiveness. I took a slow, deep breath, and then I began to laugh. It started as a soft chuckle and quickly grew into a full, cold, resonant laugh that echoed sharply off the glass walls of my penthouse office. It was a sound devoid of warmth or submission. My father stopped breathing heavily. What exactly is so funny? He demanded, his voice dropping into a confused snarl. Are you losing your mind? I am laughing because you have absolutely no idea who you are threatening, Dad, I said, leaning toward the speakerphone. You are threatening to cut me out of a will that is practically worthless. You are threatening to ban me from a house you do not even truly own anymore. You think you are the powerful patriarch holding the purse strings, but you are completely blind to your own financial reality. I typed a quick command into my keyboard, pulling up a specific property deed from 2 years ago. I am talking about the fact that your structural engineering firm nearly went bankrupt 24 months ago, I explained, my voice striking like a hammer. I am talking about the fact that you secretly took out a massive second mortgage on your house to cover your failing business investments because you refused to admit you were losing money. And when you defaulted on those mortgage payments, the bank prepared to foreclose on your precious, perfect suburban home. Do you remember that, Dad? Do you remember that, Dad? Do you remember when a private, anonymous investment group suddenly bought your debt from the bank and restructured your loan at a remarkably generous interest rate so you could keep up appearances? The line was completely silent. I knew my mother was standing right next to him, listening in absolute horror as their deepest, darkest financial secret was dragged into the light. You think some benevolent stranger swooped in to save your reputation? I continued, my words slicing through their manufactured reality. It was me, Dad. I am the sole owner of that investment group. I used my own capital to buy your debt, because despite everything you put me through, I did not want to see my parents thrown out onto the street. I own the mortgage on your house. I hold the ultimate legal deed to the property you are currently threatening to ban me from. I am your bank. I am your landlord. I could hear my mother let out a terrified gasp. My father tried to formulate some kind of authoritative denial, but he merely choked on his own breath. His entire worldview, his absolute certainty in his own superiority over me had just been atomized. "You spent my entire life calling me a boring failure," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a scream. "You mocked my career. You praised Chelsea for running around with fake millionaires, while you actively bled cash to maintain your country club facade. I built an empire while you built a mountain of debt. And now you have the audacity to call me and demand I send $30,000 to save a woman who stole my credit card and abandoned her children." "Jillian, please," my mother finally whispered to me, her voice cracking with raw, undisguised terror. "We genuinely had no idea." "Ignorance is not an excuse, Mom," I replied coldly. "So here is exactly how this is going to work. This is the only warning you will ever receive. You are not going to send Chelsea a single dime. You are not going to ask anyone else in this family to send her money. If I find out that you transferred even $1 single to the Caribbean to help that criminal escape the consequences of her actions, I will call my legal team immediately. I will call in your loan, and I will initiate foreclosure proceedings on your house tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavy with absolute and crushing defeat. The shifting balance of power was physically palpable through the telephone line. Harrison and Barbara, the proud, arrogant parents who had spent 34 years treating me like a second-class citizen, were entirely paralyzed by the brilliant, inescapable trap I had built around them. They could not wire the money. They could not save Chelsea. They were completely at my mercy. I did not wait for them to formulate a pathetic response. I reached out and pressed the button on my desk, ending the call and severing their connection. I sat back in the quiet glow of my monitors, listening to the steady breathing of the twins down the hall, fully prepared for the storm that would inevitably follow. The phone did ring, of course. It rang incessantly throughout the night, lighting up the dark office with frantic calls from my mother and dozens of desperate text messages from Chelsea. I silenced the device and placed it face down inside my desk drawer. Let them panic. Let them scramble in the messy consequences of their own actions. My priority was no longer the toxic drama unfolding thousands of miles away on a tropical island. My focus belonged entirely to the two small boys currently sleeping under my roof. When morning sunlight finally broke over the beautiful Chicago skyline, I quietly walked into the kitchen and prepared a massive breakfast. I made fluffy pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh fruit, hoping the comforting smell would gently wake them. Leo and Liam emerged from the guest suite, rubbing their eyes and looking around tentatively, as if expecting the beautiful apartment to suddenly vanish like a dream. I sat with them at the kitchen island, keeping my voice soft and encouraging while they ate ravenously. I watched closely as Liam tried to secretly hoard a piece of bacon in his napkin, a heartbreaking survival instinct that told me everything I needed to know about their unpredictable life at home. I gently placed another piece of bacon on his plate and told him he never had to hide food here. After breakfast, I knelt down to their eye level and explained that we were going on a small adventure to see a nice doctor just to make sure they were growing up strong and healthy. They were hesitant at first, but the gentle promise of a trip to the toy store afterward earned me 2 shy nods. I drove them to a highly recommended private pediatric clinic downtown, where I had pulled a few strings with a board member to secure an immediate emergency appointment. Dr. Evans was a warm, grandmotherly woman with decades of clinical experience in child psychology and physical trauma. She took the boys into a bright examination room painted with cheerful ocean murals, making them comfortable with gentle jokes and colorful stickers. I waited outside in the hallway, my hands clasped tightly together, until she called me into her private office an hour later. Her professional, welcoming smile was completely gone, replaced by an expression of deep clinical concern. She handed me a thick, detailed medical file. "The physical examination indicates mild but persistent malnutrition," Dr. Evans stated, her voice incredibly grave. "They are significantly underweight for their age group, and their comprehensive blood work shows distinct vitamin deficiencies that absolutely do not occur overnight. This is the direct result of prolonged systemic neglect." I felt a sharp physical ache in my chest. Chelsea had always ensured her own closet was full of expensive designer labels, but she could not be bothered to provide basic daily nutrition for her own children. She bought luxury handbags while her sons went hungry. It was a sickening reality to process. But it was the psychological evaluation that truly horrified me to my core. Dr. Evans leaned forward, resting her hands on the heavy mahogany desk. "Jillian, both boys exhibit severe signs of deep emotional trauma. Through therapeutic play sessions this morning, Leo revealed that their mother frequently locked them inside a dark closet for entire weekends when she wanted to entertain guests or simply did not want to deal with them. They were left sitting on the floor, with nothing but a box of dry cereal and a plastic water bottle while she partied in the next room. Liam has developed severe anxiety triggers related to darkness and loud noises. They are absolutely terrified of making mistakes because they heavily associate making noise with severe emotional punishment and isolation." A cold, silent fury washed over me. Chelsea had not just been a careless, selfish mother. She had been an active monster, destroying their childhood from the inside out to serve her own vanity. I thanked Dr. Evans and requested certified copies of the entire medical report, including her professional recommendation that returning the children to their mother would result in immediate and profound harm. I promised her that Chelsea would never have the opportunity to hurt them again. Leaving the clinic, I took the boys to the promised toy store, letting them pick out whatever they wanted before bringing them safely back to the penthouse. I watched them quietly build a tower with their new blocks, amazed by how gentle and careful they were with each other. Once they were occupied in the sunlit living room, I made the most important phone call of my life. I contacted Mitchell, an absolute shark of an attorney widely regarded as the most ruthless and highly effective family law practitioner in the entire state of Illinois. I paid his exorbitant emergency retainer fee without a single second thought, and he arrived at my apartment less than 2 hours later, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. We sat in my home office reviewing the mountain of evidence I had meticulously gathered. I slid the certified airport security report, the credit card fraud logs, and the devastating medical evaluation across the glass desk. Mitchell reviewed the documents in complete silence, his sharp eyes scanning the pages with clinical precision. He did not speak until he had read every single page of the doctor's notes. When he finally looked up, he let out a low, impressed whistle. "Your sister has handed us a fully loaded weapon," he said, tapping the medical file with his index finger. "This goes far beyond standard child neglect, Jillian. The deliberate isolation in dark rooms, combined with the physical malnutrition and the documented airport abandonment, gives us everything we need for a definitive, permanent victory. No judge in this state will look at this file and grant her any leniency." I leaned forward, resting my arms firmly on the desk. "I do not just want temporary custody, Mitchell," I told him, my voice steady and resolute. "I want you to file a petition to completely and permanently strip Chelsea of her maternal rights. I want an emergency restraining order preventing her from coming anywhere near these boys, and I want it formally filed with the court before she even steps foot back on American soil." Mitchell smiled a sharp, predatory expression that confirmed I had hired the right man. "The emergency injunction will be filed first thing tomorrow morning," he assured me, packing the files into his briefcase. "A judge will grant this immediately based on the medical report alone. Your sister is about to face the legal equivalent of a firing squad. She will never have custody of those boys again." While Mitchell and I finalized our aggressive legal strategy, my secure phone buzzed with a direct update from Victor at the Azure Pearl Resort. The situation in the Caribbean had reached its pathetic and absolutely inevitable conclusion. Chelsea and Donovan had been forcibly evicted from the property after utterly failing to secure the $28,000 they owed. To avoid being immediately handed over to the local island authorities for credit card fraud, they were forced to empty their suitcases right there in the Grand Resort lobby. Victor informed me that Chelsea had to sell her authentic designer handbags, her expensive jewelry, and even her customized engagement ring to a local pawnbroker just to cover a fraction of the outstanding bill and purchase 2 cheap economy tickets back to Chicago. The resort security watched them hand over their prized possessions in front of the other wealthy guests, confirming their total humiliation. They were currently sitting in the humid airport terminal, stripped of their luxury facade, entirely broke and completely miserable. Donovan was furious, realizing his meal ticket had evaporated, and Chelsea was humiliated beyond words. The glamorous tropical vacation she had bragged about online had ended with her pawning her possessions just to escape a foreign jail cell. The fragile alliance between the con artist and the narcissist had predictably shattered under the immense financial pressure I had applied. They thought the absolute worst of their nightmare was the embarrassment they suffered on the island. They were boarding a discount flight, believing they could just return home, cry to our enabling parents, and quickly sweep this entire disaster under the rug like they always did. They thought a few fake tears and a fabricated story about banking errors would save them from any real consequences. They had absolutely no idea that the real storm was waiting for them the second they landed. I sat quietly at my desk and looked out over the sparkling city. My sister had taken everything for granted her whole life, never facing any true accountability. She had finally destroyed her own life with her unbelievable selfishness and her arrogant greed. It was over. But tomorrow, she would walk into a meticulously designed trap. I was going to enjoy watching her entire world burn to the ground. By the time Chelsea and Donovan landed in Chicago, they had decided truth was too dangerous to survive. They arrived exhausted, furious, and stripped of most of the possessions they had taken to the island. The engagement ring, Chelsea's best handbags, and several pieces of jewelry were gone. Before the discount flight reached the gate, she was already constructing a version in which she was the victim of a bank failure, an abusive hotel manager, and a jealous sister. My first warning arrived through social media. A cousin forwarded me a screenshot of a new fundraising page titled, "Help Bring Chelsea's Family Back from a Caribbean Nightmare." The photograph at the top showed Chelsea and Donovan smiling beside the ocean before the card was declined. The description claimed that an international banking error had frozen their accounts, that resort employees had illegally detained them, and that they had been forced to sell personal belongings to escape. It asked for $45,000 to cover emergency travel legal fees, hotel debt, and trauma counseling. Chelsea had written that she had spent the entire ordeal worrying about her beloved twins waiting at home. She did not mention leaving those twins on an airport floor. She did not mention canceling my ticket, taking my corporate card, or ordering a $2,000 bottle of champagne. She wrote that certain relatives had abandoned her during the worst experience of her life, carefully avoiding my name, while making the target obvious to everyone who knew us. Donations began appearing within minutes. Most were small contributions from distant relatives who had heard only my parents' version of events. Barbara shared the link with a message calling Chelsea a courageous young mother. Harrison posted that the family would not be intimidated by heartless corporations or false accusations. Underneath, acquaintances praised Chelsea's strength and criticized unnamed people who valued money more than blood. I captured every page donation timestamp and statement before the campaign could be edited. I forwarded the material to Mitchell and to the investigator assigned to the credit card report. The fundraising appeal was not merely humiliating. It transformed a private lie into a documented attempt to obtain money through false representations. Mitchell advised me not to respond publicly. "Let them preserve the evidence for us," he said. "Every sentence they publish makes denial harder later." The next message came directly from my mother. It contained no greeting. "Bring Leo and Liam to the house tomorrow at 6, Barbara wrote. "Chelsea needs photographs with the boys to reassure everyone that the family is together. Dress them in the blue sweaters. Do not upset them with any of your accusations before the party." A second message followed before I could reply. "This is not optional, Jillian. Your sister has suffered enough. She must be seen as a devoted mother after what the hotel did to her. You will smile hand over the children and apologize for refusing to send the money." I read the words twice. My mother was openly describing the twins as props in a reputation campaign. She did not ask whether they wanted to see Chelsea. She did not ask whether they were sleeping, eating, or recovering from the terror of being abandoned. She wanted matching sweaters and a photograph that could be placed above the GoFundMe link. Leo was building a bridge from wooden blocks on the living room rug when I set the phone down. Liam sat close beside him, arranging toy cars in careful rows. When the screen lit up again with Barbara's name, Liam flinched at the sound. I muted it immediately. Neither child needed to hear another adult claim ownership over them. I called Mitchell and read him the messages. He was silent for several seconds. "Do not surrender physical custody at that house," he said. "The emergency filing is before the judge now. I expect a signed temporary order and a restraining provision before the party begins. Until then, you remain the documented emergency caregiver. If you attend the boys, stay beside you at all times. I will arrange for service of the order as soon as it is issued." I asked whether bringing them into the same room as Chelsea would endanger the petition. Mitchell said the court would care about safety, not appearances. He recommended that I avoid the party altogether unless there was a compelling reason to attend. There was one. My parents had invited relatives, business associates, and wealthy neighbors to hear Chelsea's false account. The GoFundMe campaign was spreading. Donovan had remained with her because neither had another source of transportation, housing, or money. Together they were rewriting the record before law enforcement and family court could act. Silence would not defeat the evidence, but it could attract more fraudulent donations and let Chelsea portray the children as willing participants. I would not take the boys there merely to prove a point. Dr. Evans advised that any contact be brief, supervised, and ended immediately if either child showed distress. During a secure video session, Leo said he did not want to be alone with his mother. Liam said he wanted to remain with a light stayed on. I told them I would hold their hands and leave the moment they asked. They agreed only after I promised they would return to the penthouse with me. The following afternoon, Mitchell delivered copies of the filed petition, the medical report, the airport incident record, the fraud alerts, and the resort invoice. The temporary custody order had been approved. The restraining provision would take effect the moment Chelsea was formally served. Mitchell planned to arrive separately with the certified documents and asked me not to reveal that timing to anyone. Meanwhile, Barbara transformed the house into a theater. Photographs sent by relatives showed caterers carrying silver trays through the side entrance. A silver banner reading, "Welcome Home, Chelsea," was stretched across the living room archway. My mother had arranged flowers, hired a bartender, and told guests that Chelsea had survived an international financial attack. The fundraising link was printed on small cards beside the drinks table. By late afternoon, the campaign had collected several $1,000s. Chelsea posted a heavily edited photograph of herself in an emerald dress with the caption, "Nothing can keep a mother from her babies." She wrote that the reunion would prove the truth. The photograph was taken in my parents' guest room less than 24 hours after she had sold jewelry to avoid detention. Her ability to rebuild a glamorous surface over complete moral collapse was remarkable. At 5:30, Barbara called again. When I answered, she immediately demanded to know whether the boys were dressed correctly. I told her they were safe and that I would decide what they wore. She warned me not to bring lawyers, police, or documents into her home. She said the evening was about healing and that any attempt to embarrass Chelsea would make me responsible for destroying the family. "You already invited the truth when you invited witnesses," I replied. She ended the call without asking to speak to her grandsons. I dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit and placed the evidence folders in my leather briefcase. The clothing was deliberate. Chelsea and my parents had spent years using feminine marriage and appearance as measurements of worth. I would not dress for their approval. I would enter the room as exactly what I was, the professional who had documented every transaction, every refusal, and every lie. Before leaving, I knelt in front of Leo and Liam. I reminded them that they could squeeze my hand if they wanted to go. Leo asked whether their mother could make them stay. I showed him the temporary order without burdening him with the legal language and told him no. No one in that house could take them from me. Liam asked whether the bedroom lights at home would remain on. I promised they would. The drive into the wealthy Chicago suburbs took less than 40 minutes, but the boys grew quieter with every mile. The polished neighborhood stone walls and familiar tree-lined streets brought back memories they could not yet explain. I kept one hand near the center console where they could see it, and spoke calmly about the route home. When Harrison's colonial estate appeared ahead, the circular driveway was already packed with luxury vehicles. Warm chandelier light spilled through the bay windows, and music drifted over the lawn. I parked on the street rather than allowing another car to block us in. I secured my phone, checked that Mitchell had received my arrival message, and took the boys' hands. We walked up the brick path together. Through the front windows, I could see relatives holding wine glasses beneath the silver banner, while Chelsea stood near the fireplace, receiving sympathy. The GoFundMe cards were visible on a table beside the entrance. I stopped at the heavy oak door and looked down at my nephews. Both were frightened, but neither released my hand. I reminded them once more that we would leave together. Then I placed my palm against the door and prepared to enter the performance my family had built around a lie. I did not bother to ring the doorbell. I simply pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the grand foyer. The house was packed with people holding crystal wine glasses and balancing small plates of expensive catered appetizers. A massive banner hung across the archway of the living room reading, "Welcome Home Chelsea," in elegant silver lettering. The sheer hypocrisy of the display sent a cold wave of disgust washing over me. I guided Leo and Liam through the crowded hallway, ignoring the curious stares of my aunts, uncles, and various family acquaintances. The boys pressed themselves tightly against my legs, trying to make themselves as small as possible to avoid drawing any attention. They recognized the familiar environment of their emotional captivity, and their instinct was to hide. I kept my posture completely rigid, projecting an aura of absolute authority as I navigated through the sea of guests. I was not here to socialize or make small talk with relatives who had spent years looking down on me. I was here to execute a targeted demolition. As we reached the center of the expansive living room, the crowd parted slightly, revealing the guest of honor. Chelsea was standing near the grand fireplace, holding a glass of white wine and soaking in the sympathetic attention of several older relatives. Despite supposedly being a traumatized victim of a terrible banking error who had just endured a harrowing journey home, she looked absolutely flawless. She was wearing a stunning emerald green designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her makeup applied with professional precision. She was actively performing the role of the brave survivor, recounting a completely fabricated story about how a malicious bank had frozen her accounts without warning, leaving her stranded and terrified on a foreign island. When she turned and spotted me standing in the middle of the room with her children, the tragic victim persona vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. But she quickly recovered, plastering a wide, artificial smile across her face. She handed her wine glass to an aunt and began marching directly toward us with her arms outstretched, preparing to put on a show for the crowd. "Oh, my sweet, precious babies," Chelsea cried out, projecting her voice so that every single person in the living room would turn to watch her heartfelt reunion. "Mommy missed you so much." She dropped to her knees in front of me, reaching out to grab the boys and pull them into a dramatic embrace for the guests. But Leo and Liam did not run into her arms. Instead, they shrank back in absolute terror. Liam let out a soft whimper and buried his face directly into the fabric of my trousers, while Leo grabbed a handful of my jacket, wrapping his arms tightly around my knee. They refused to even look at her, pressing their small bodies against me for physical protection. The rejection was profound, public, and completely undeniable. The guests watching the reunion fell into an awkward, uncomfortable silence. Chelsea's outstretched arms dropped to her sides, and her face flushed with a dark, humiliated rage. She realized instantly that she could not force them to play the role of loving children for her audience. Her mask of maternal affection shattered completely, and she stood up, turning her vicious glare directly onto me. "What exactly have you been saying to my children to turn them against me, Jillian?" She hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that carried through the quiet room. Before I could even formulate a response, she stepped back and looked me up and down with exaggerated disgust, intentionally pivoting to attack my appearance to save her own bruised ego. "Thank you for doing your job and being an unpaid nanny for the week," she said loudly, ensuring the nearby relatives could hear her dripping condescension. "But honestly, you should really learn how to dress yourself appropriately for a party. You come into our parents' house looking like a miserable old spinster wearing a stiff gray suit. It is completely pathetic, Jillian. You always look so desperate and unhappy." Her cruel words hung in the air, intended to humiliate me and remind everyone of my supposed status as the family failure. In the past, a public insult like that from my glamorous sister would have made me shrink away in deep shame. But tonight, her words felt completely hollow, empty, and entirely meaningless against the massive weight of the reality I carried. My parents quickly pushed their way through the crowd of silent guests, coming to stand shoulder to shoulder with their precious golden child. Harrison and Barbara presented a united front of absolute hostility, their glares fixed entirely on me. "Jillian, your behavior is completely unacceptable," my father barked, his face red with fierce indignation. "How dare you bring that sour attitude into this house tonight?" "We asked you to bring the boys so Chelsea could hold her family together after the terrible ordeal she survived." My mother crossed her arms tightly, nodding in fervent agreement. "You owe your sister and this entire family a massive apology, Jillian," she demanded, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "We ordered you to wire the money to save her from that horrible situation in the Caribbean, and you selfishly refused. You abandoned your own sister when she was terrified and stranded. You put your petty jealousy above the safety of this family. You should be ashamed of yourself, standing there in your sad business suit judging people who actually know how to live." I stood perfectly still in the center of the grand living room, absorbing their toxic attacks without flinching a single muscle. The surrounding relatives watched with bated breath, expecting me to break down in tears or run out the front door in total humiliation, just as I had done so many times in my youth. I looked at Chelsea in her expensive dress, at my father with his arrogant scowl, and at my mother with her blind, enabling rage. I let their insults wash over me, feeling nothing but a cold, calculated anticipation. I did not raise my voice or offer a defense regarding my clothing or my character. Instead, I maintained my unyielding professional posture. I slowly reached one hand into my leather briefcase, taking my time as the room remained frozen in tense silence. I grasped the file folder containing the absolute destruction of their manufactured reality. I calmly pulled it out, holding the undeniable truth in my hands, preparing to drop the executioner's blade on their perfect world. The heavy manila folder felt cool and substantial against my fingertips. I gripped the edge of the thick cardstock, letting the profound silence of the room stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. Every single guest in my parents' lavish living room was staring directly at me. My father Harrison stood with his chest puffed out, waiting for me to cower and apologize. My mother Barbara had her arms crossed tightly, her face pinched in an expression of absolute self-righteous fury. And Chelsea, my perfectly styled sister, stood there, radiating an artificial confidence that was about to be permanently extinguished. She actually rolled her eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh, as if my silence was just another annoying inconvenience she had to endure. She genuinely thought I had pulled out some boring work documents or a spreadsheet to justify why I had not wired her the money. She had no concept of the total devastation I was about to unleash. I opened the folder slowly, folding the cover back to reveal the stack of highly sensitive documents. I looked directly at the crowd of wealthy neighbors, aunts, uncles, and family friends who had gathered to celebrate this supposed homecoming. "A banking error?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the high ceilings of the formal living room. I turned my gaze entirely to Chelsea. "You stood in front of all these people tonight and spun a tragic tale about being stranded in the Caribbean because a malicious banking error froze your accounts. You actually looked our relatives in the eyes and asked them to donate to a fundraising campaign to help you recover from a terrible financial injustice." I reached into the folder and extracted a crisp white piece of paper containing the official letterhead of the Azure Pearl Resort and Spa. I held it up for the entire room to see. "There was no banking error, Chelsea," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "You were forcibly evicted from your luxury hotel by security because you attempted to pay for a $28,000 vacation using a stolen premium corporate credit card." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of well-dressed guests. Several aunts exchanged shocked glances, and the soft murmurs of confusion began to ripple through the room. My mother stepped forward, her face flushing with immediate defensive anger. "Jillian, how dare you stand there and make up such disgusting lies about your sister?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are just trying to ruin her special night because you are a bitter, jealous woman. Stop this nonsense right now before I have your father throw you out into the street." I did not flinch or break eye contact with the crowd. I simply took a step forward and handed the official hotel invoice directly to my Uncle Thomas, who was standing near the front of the crowd. "Read it, Uncle Thomas," I instructed him calmly. "It is a fully itemized bill for a penthouse suite, private helicopter transfers, and vintage champagne. And right at the bottom you will see the explicit note from the hotel management stating that the guests were ejected for severe credit card fraud." Uncle Thomas took the paper, his eyes scanning the bold print. His face went completely pale, and he looked up at Chelsea with an expression of profound disbelief. He passed the document to the woman standing next to him, and within seconds, the physical proof of Chelsea's crime was circulating through the crowd. Chelsea stumbled backward a step, her perfect posture crumbling as the reality of the exposure hit her. She looked wildly at our parents, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to formulate a plausible lie to explain away the written evidence. But before she could speak, I reached back into the folder and pulled out the next document. "You did not just steal any random credit card," I continued, keeping the pressure relentless and suffocating. "You stole my corporate expense card directly from my purse during Sunday dinner. You used my stolen assets to upgrade your flight to first class, and then you completely abandoned your 5-year-old sons by a trash bin at the airport terminal. The room erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers. People were openly staring at Leo and Liam, who were still clinging desperately to my legs, seeking protection from their own mother. Harrison slammed his fist down on a nearby side table, rattling an expensive crystal vase. "That is enough, Jillian!" he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You fabricated these documents to make yourself look like a savior. Chelsea is engaged to a highly successful venture capitalist. Donovan has millions of dollars in offshore accounts. They do not need to steal from a miserable corporate drone like you." I turned my attention to the man standing slightly behind my sister. Donovan had been remarkably quiet since I entered the room, attempting to blend into the background like a coward. He was wearing a sharply tailored designer suit, and his counterfeit luxury watch gleamed in the light of the chandelier. He was sweating visibly, his eyes darting toward the front door, as if calculating the exact distance required for a rapid escape. I pulled a thick, heavily redacted corporate intelligence dossier from my folder. "Is that right, Dad?" I asked, projecting my voice so every single investor and wealthy neighbor in the room could hear me perfectly. "Are you talking about Donovan Pierce, the brilliant venture capitalist?" I held the dossier up, tapping the cover with my index finger. "Because according to the Global Corporate Compliance Registry and the Federal Financial Task Force, Donovan Pierce is not an investor. He is a professional con artist running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme." The sudden silence in the room was absolute and deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Donovan visibly flinched, his hands dropping to his sides. "That is a complete lie," he stammered, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny of 50 pairs of eyes. "She is crazy. She does not know what she is talking about." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "You currently have over $3 million in outstanding debt from civil judgments," I stated, citing the exact figures from memory. "You have active eviction notices on your last 3 apartments. The sports car you parked in my parents' driveway is a short-term lease that is currently 3 months past due for immediate repossession. You are completely broke, Donovan. You targeted my desperate status-obsessed sister because you needed a temporary gold mine to pay for your meals and your flights while you hid from your furious investors." Chelsea turned to look at Donovan, her eyes wide with mounting horror. The glamorous illusion she had built her entire identity around was disintegrating into a pile of pathetic, toxic dust. "Donovan, tell them she's lying," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Show them your investment portfolio. Show them the offshore accounts you told me about. Tell them we are going to buy that mansion in the hills." Donovan violently ripped his arm away from her grasp, a look of pure, unfiltered disgust crossing his sweating face. "Shut up, Chelsea," he hissed, his carefully constructed, charming persona vanishing entirely. "You are just as broke and pathetic as I am. You spent the entire trip bragging about your rich family, and you could not even pay a hotel bill without getting us thrown out onto the street. You are a complete fraud." The guests gasped audibly, stepping away from the couple as the ugly truth of their relationship was laid bare for everyone to witness. My mother let out a devastated wail, covering her face as the immense social humiliation washed over her. The wealthy friends she invited to show off her perfect family were actively witnessing a criminal train wreck. My father looked like he was about to have a heart attack, staring at the man he had been bragging about all evening. Donovan realized his entire operation was destroyed. The lucrative setup he had manipulated was gone, and his dark financial secrets were being broadcast to a room full of affluent people who could call authorities. A violent rage twisted his features. He realized I was the sole architect of his total destruction. "You smug witch," he snarled, his hands balling into tight fists. "You think you can walk in here and ruin my life?" He lunged forward. Leo and Liam shrieked, but before Donovan could close the distance, a piercing, deafening sound shattered the night air. The unmistakable shrill wail of multiple police sirens echoed down the street, growing louder. Red and blue lights began flashing violently through the sheer curtains, illuminating his terrified face in a neon strobe. The execution finally arrived. The heavy oak front door of my parents' house did not simply open. It was thrown wide with a sudden, forceful impact that made the massive crystal chandelier above the grand entryway tremble and chime. The flashing red and blue lights from the street poured into the foyer, casting wild, frantic shadows across the expensive wallpaper. 3 uniformed police officers marched directly into the house, their expressions set in stone. Right behind them, wearing an immaculately tailored dark navy suit and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, was Mitchell. My attorney looked completely at ease amidst the sudden chaos, projecting an aura of absolute legal authority that immediately silenced the remaining murmurs in the living room. He scanned the crowd, his sharp eyes finding me instantly, before shifting his focus directly to the sweating, panicked man standing just a few feet away. Donovan realized the flashing neon lights and the sudden police presence were not a terrible coincidence. The fake confidence he had desperately tried to maintain evaporated in a split second. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting toward the large glass patio doors at the back of the house, calculating a frantic escape route. He took one sudden, desperate step backward, knocking over a tall decorative lamp that shattered violently against the hardwood floor. But he did not even make it 2 steps toward the exit. The lead police officer, a tall, imposing man with a tactical belt, moved with incredible, terrifying speed. "Stop right there and keep your hands where I can see them," the officer barked, his voice booming with absolute command. "Donovan Pierce, we have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest." Donovan froze, his shoulders dropping as the sheer, inescapable reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He raised his trembling hands into the air, his expensive counterfeit watch catching the flashing police lights. 2 officers stepped forward, swiftly closing the distance between them. They grabbed his arms with practiced, aggressive efficiency, spinning him around roughly. Donovan let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp of surprise as they shoved him forward. He was slammed chest first, directly onto my mother's prized, polished mahogany dining table. The impact sent a tray of delicate catered appetizers crashing to the floor, sending expensive caviar and smoked salmon scattering across the pristine white Persian rug. "You have the right to remain silent," the second officer recited loudly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around Donovan's wrists echoed through the silent, horrified room. The officer continued reading the Miranda rights while pressing Donovan's face firmly against the polished wood of the table. "You are being placed under federal arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, international money laundering, and running an illegal financial Ponzi scheme." Chelsea, who had been standing frozen in absolute shock, finally processed what was happening right in front of her. The glamorous illusion of her perfect, wealthy future was being violently dismantled by law enforcement in her parents' living room. She let out a piercing, theatrical scream that grated against my ears. She lunged forward, her high heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor, desperately trying to reach the man who was supposed to fund her entire luxurious existence. "What are you doing to him?" she shrieked, grabbing the arm of the nearest police officer. "Let him go, right now. This is a massive mistake. He is a highly successful venture capitalist. You are arresting the wrong man." The officer firmly but gently pushed Chelsea back, creating a safe physical barrier between her and the suspect. "Ma'am, step away from the suspect immediately," he warned, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. This is an active federal arrest, and if you interfere with our duties, you will be placed in handcuffs as well. Chelsea stumbled backward, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She spun around and looked frantically at our father. Harrison had built his entire identity on being the most powerful and influential man in any room. Chelsea fully expected him to step up and use his supposed wealth and status to make this ugly situation simply disappear. "Dad, you have to do something," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperate hysteria. "Tell them who you are. Call your lawyers. Write them a check for his bail right now. We cannot let them take Donovan away like a common criminal." Harrison puffed out his chest and took a tentative step toward the police officers, attempting to project his usual arrogant authority. "Now listen here, officers," he began, his voice loud and demanding. "I am Harrison. This is my private residence, and you are ruining a very important family gathering. I demand to speak to your superior officer immediately. I know the chief of police in this district, and I assure you this entire situation is just a terrible financial misunderstanding." The lead officer did not even blink. He looked at my father with an expression of pure, unfiltered disdain. "Sir, this warrant was issued directly by a federal judge regarding a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation," the officer stated flatly. "Your local connections mean absolutely nothing here. I highly suggest you step back and let us conclude our official business, unless you want to be formally charged with obstructing a federal investigation." Harrison stopped dead in his tracks, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The ultimate suburban patriarch had just been publicly emasculated in his own living room. He realized he had absolutely no power, no influence, and no ability to control the narrative. He slowly took a step back, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He looked at Chelsea and slowly shook his head, indicating he was completely powerless to save her precious millionaire. While Harrison surrendered to the police, my mother Barbara was fighting a completely different battle. She had finally noticed what the 50 wealthy guests in her living room were doing. The aunts, uncles, neighbors, and affluent family friends were not stepping forward to offer support or sympathy. Instead, they were all holding up their glowing smartphones, actively recording the entire humiliating spectacle. The pristine, flawless image of the perfect family she had spent decades meticulously cultivating was being broadcast live across social media. Barbara frantically darted around the living room, waving her hands in the air like a panicked bird. "Please stop recording!" she cried out, her voice tight with absolute terror and deep social shame. "Put your phones away right this instant! This is a private family matter. Please respect our privacy. I am begging you to stop filming my home." But nobody listened to her. The guests simply shifted their angles to get a better view of Donovan being hauled up from the mahogany table. They were capturing every single second of the spectacular downfall. The fake veneer of our family was completely shattered, exposing the ugly, rotten truth beneath it all. The officers hauled Donovan to his feet, his hands secured tightly behind his back. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with the appetizers from the table. He looked absolutely pathetic. As they began to march him toward the front door, Chelsea made one final desperate attempt to cling to her shattered fantasy. "Donovan!" she cried out, reaching her hand toward him. "Tell them it is a mistake! Tell them you will fix this and come back for me!" Donovan stopped walking for a brief moment and looked at Chelsea over his shoulder. The charming, affectionate mask he had worn for the past 2 months was entirely gone. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Are you completely stupid, Chelsea?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "There is no money. There was never any money. You were just a convenient dumb mark to pay for my hotel rooms while I hid from my investors. You are completely useless to me now. Enjoy paying off that resort bill by yourself." The officers shoved him forward, marching him out the front door and into the flashing lights of the waiting police cruisers. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence in the destroyed living room. Chelsea stood perfectly still, her arms hanging limply at her sides. The reality of Donovan's cruel, parting words finally pierced through her thick layers of absolute denial. She had lost her millionaire fiancé. She had lost her social status. She was facing massive international hotel debts, and the entire wealthy community had just watched her get exposed as a gullible, gold-digging fraud. She slowly turned her head, and her furious, bloodshot eyes locked directly onto me. I was standing calmly near the fireplace, holding Leo and Liam, who were still hiding behind my legs. In Chelsea's twisted, narcissistic mind, none of this was her fault. She refused to take accountability for her own terrible choices. She needed a scapegoat, and she chose the person she had blamed for everything her entire life. "You did this?" she screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet room like a jagged knife. "You called them. You set us up in the Caribbean, and you brought the police here tonight. You ruined my entire life because you have always been a jealous, miserable loser." Chelsea completely snapped. The sheer, overwhelming embarrassment broke her final remaining shred of self-control. She let out a guttural shriek of pure rage and charged directly at me. She raised her right hand high into the air, her manicured fingers curled tight, fully intending to deliver a violent, devastating slap across my face. I did not flinch or take a single step backward. I stood my ground, waiting for the impact. But the strike never landed. Mitchell moved with an effortless, elegant speed that defied his formal appearance. He stepped smoothly in front of me, intercepting Chelsea's downward swing. He caught her wrist firmly in midair, his large hand locking around her arm like a vice. Chelsea gasped in shock, struggling fruitlessly against his iron grip. "I highly recommend you do not attempt to assault my client," Mitchell said, his voice dangerously low and smooth. "It would severely complicate the legal documents I am required to serve you tonight." Mitchell released her wrist, giving her a slight push backward. He calmly opened his sleek leather briefcase and retrieved a thick bound legal document featuring a bright red official court stamp on the front cover. He held it out, extending it directly toward her trembling hands. Mitchell held the legal document, presenting it to my sister with cold detachment. The red stamp glared against the white paper. Chelsea stared at it, her chest heaving. She snatched it, her eyes darting across the heavy text. I watched the color drain from her face. Her styled exterior was gone, replaced by the panicked expression of a cornered animal realizing the trap had snapped shut. "What is this?" she breathed, her voice trembling as she looked at my attorney. "What kind of fake garbage are you trying to hand me right now?" "That is a judicially approved emergency order, granting full, temporary custody of Leo and Liam to my client Mitchell," stated his voice, resonating through the room. "It is accompanied by a formal restraining order mandating that you remain at least 500 feet away from the minor children. Furthermore, the state has initiated proceedings to terminate your maternal rights based on overwhelming evidence of child abuse." Chelsea let out a choked gasp, shaking her head in violent denial. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, looking wildly between me and Mitchell. "You have no right! I am their mother! You cannot just steal my children because you are a jealous, bitter spinster!" Mitchell did not raise his voice, but his words cut through her hysteria. "The judge found the evidence compelling," he continued. "We provided airport logs documenting your intentional abandonment of the minors to board an international flight. We provided the credit card fraud reports tracing your theft of my client's funds. But the most persuasive evidence was the medical evaluation conducted by a board-certified pediatrician this morning." The wealthy guests remaining in the room exchanged horrified glances. The murmurs started again, this time laced with deep disgust. Chelsea tried to open her mouth to speak, but Mitchell talked over her, delivering the final crushing blow to her reputation. The medical report details persistent malnutrition and profound psychological trauma. Mitchell stated loudly, ensuring everyone heard the truth. The doctor documented your habit of locking your children in dark closets for entire weekends, without food or water, while you entertained guests. The court considers you an immediate physical and psychological threat to these children. You are legally forbidden from speaking to them, approaching them, or contacting them in any capacity, effective this exact second. Chelsea dropped the documents onto the hardwood floor as if they had physically burned her hands. She spun around to face our parents, her eyes wide with desperate panic. "Mom, Dad, do not let them do this to me," she cried out. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Tell them they are lying. Tell these police officers to throw Jillian out of the house. She is trying to ruin my life and steal my babies. Please do something to stop her." Harrison had been standing in stunned silence, but Chelsea's plea activated his instinct to protect his golden child. The humiliation of Donovan's arrest had wounded his ego, but the idea that his daughter was asserting dominance in his home pushed him over the edge. Harrison stepped forward, his face contorted into a mask of rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You arrogant, vindictive snake!" he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "How dare you bring this circus here? How dare you attempt to destroy your own family? You fabricate these disgusting lies about your sister because you are miserable and alone. You have always been a toxic presence in this house." I kept my hands resting gently on Leo and Liam's shoulders, shielding them from their grandfather's outburst. I did not flinch. I looked at him with an expression of absolute calm control. "I did not fabricate a single thing, Dad," I replied, my voice completely steady. "The medical reports have certified. The airport logs are verified. Your golden child is a criminal and an abuser. I will not listen to another word of your garbage," Harrison shouted, taking another aggressive step toward me. The two police officers who had remained in the room immediately stepped forward, resting their hands near their tactical belts, warning my father to maintain his physical distance. Harrison stopped, but his assault continued. "I am the head of this family, and I will not allow you to tear it apart. I am going to hire the best lawyers to sue you for defamation. I will have that custody order overturned by tomorrow morning." He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim the patriarchal authority he felt slipping through his fingers. "And as for you," he spat, glaring at me, "you are going to leave those boys here with their mother, and you are going to get out of my house this instant. I want you off my property, Jillian. You are completely disowned. You are dead to me and to this family. Do not ever set foot on my property again." The room held its collective breath, waiting for me to shatter under my father's ultimate rejection. For 34 years, that exact threat was his weapon. He believed banishing me from his suburban estate was the worst punishment he could inflict. He thought his wealth gave him the right to dictate reality. I looked at his furious face, and then I looked at Barbara, who was standing behind him, nodding in agreement. I let out a soft, humorless laugh that cut through the heavy tension in the room. "Your property?" I asked, tilting my head. "Your house?" I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. Mitchell stepped back, allowing me the floor. "Yes, my house," Harrison growled, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. I held his stare, then looked toward Mitchell. He removed a current mortgage servicing statement, the recorded assignment, and the notice my parents received when their debt changed hands. I did not need to repeat the history. Harrison had heard it on the phone days earlier, and the fear on his face proved he remembered. "This is not a debate about who is the head of the family," I said. "There is a court order in this room. 2 police officers who heard you demand that protected children be left with the person named in that order, and a recorded financial interest that prevents you from pretending I am trespassing in a house you control without limits. Mitchell stepped beside me and held up the custody papers. Mr. Harrison, he said your daughter cannot leave the children here. The emergency order grants possession and decision-making authority to my client. Any attempt to block their departure, conceal the children, or assist Chelsea in approaching them would expose you to contempt proceedings and potentially to criminal interference with custody. Your ownership dispute, whatever you imagine it to be, does not override a judge. Harrison's mouth tightened. He looked toward the remaining officers, perhaps hoping they would dismiss Mitchell's warning as theatrical. Neither moved. One officer quietly positioned himself between Chelsea and the boys. The other asked my father whether he understood the order. For the first time that evening, Harrison answered without shouting. He said yes. I lifted the mortgage statement toward him. As for the property, you know who holds the loan. I protected this house once because I believe preventing public ruin was an act of family loyalty. Do not mistake that mercy for permission to threaten me or endanger these children. If you use this property to violate the restraining order, shelter Chelsea, or harass the boys, I will direct the servicing company to exercise every remedy in the documents. Barbara moved toward me with both hands raised. Jillian, please, she whispered. We can discuss this privately. There is no reason to humiliate us in front of everyone. I looked around the room at the guests who had been invited to donate money to a false story, applaud a fabricated victim, and photograph 2 frightened children for social media. You made it public, I said. You printed the fundraising link. You invited these people to witness a lie. The truth did not create this humiliation. Your choices did. Chelsea pushed herself up from the floor, but the officer nearest her raised one hand and ordered her to remain where she was. Her eyes shifted from the custody order to the mortgage statement and then to our parents. She finally understood that the people who had rescued her from every previous consequence no longer possessed the money, authority, or courage to rescue her now. I returned the statement to Mitchell and placed both hands gently on Leo and Liam's shoulders. Here is the only boundary that matters, I said. None of you will contact these boys directly or through relatives. None of you will appear at my home, their school, their doctor's offices, or any place you believe we might be. All communication will go through counsel. If that boundary is crossed, Mitchell will act on the restraining order and my financial team will review the mortgage without another warning. The last of Harrison's anger drained away. Barbara lowered her eyes. The remaining guests stepped back toward the hallway. My parents stood in the home they had used as proof of superiority, confronted by the fact that their social power, legal threats, and financial facade could no longer command me. Neither spoke again. The crushing weight of that realization suffocated the grand living room. Harrison backed away slowly, his previously rigid shoulders sagging under the heavy reality of his massive financial vulnerability. He looked at the crystal chandelier above us and the expensive rugs beneath our feet, knowing every luxury item in his possession technically belonged to the daughter he had spent his life actively despising. Barbara stood frozen beside him, unable to formulate a cohesive thought. The wealthy guests were now quietly shuffling toward the front door, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of their absolute humiliation. Chelsea remained on the floor, staring blankly at the formal custody and restraining orders scattered across the hard wood. The shimmering illusion of her perfect life had been entirely dismantled in less than 30 minutes. She had lost her fake millionaire fiancé, who was sitting in the back of a federal police cruiser. She was facing severe felony charges for credit card fraud and a massive hotel debt she could never pay. Most devastatingly, she had just lost the ultimate leverage she held over the family. The children she viewed as mere accessories were permanently gone. I stood in the center of the wreckage, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound clarity. For 34 years, I had waited for an apology or a moment of genuine recognition from these people. I silently hoped that if I achieved enough success, they would finally look at me with the same fierce pride they reserved entirely for Chelsea. But looking at them, completely broken and exposed, I realized I no longer needed their validation. I did not shed a single tear for the destruction of my biological family. I felt nothing but cold liberation. I turned my attention away from the pathetic display of my parents and my sister, and focused entirely on the only two people in the room who actually mattered. Leo and Liam were still pressing their small, trembling bodies against my legs. I crouched down, slowly bringing myself to their eye level, so they would not feel overwhelmed by the towering adults around them. I offered them a soft, reassuring smile that was completely genuine. Liam let out a tiny sniffle, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I gently reached out and wiped away his tears. "We are going to go home now," I told them, my voice warm and steady, completely contrasting the icy tone I had used with my father. "We are going back to the apartment with the big windows and the fluffy beds." I asked if they were ready to leave, and they both nodded with profound, eager relief. I stood up smoothly, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored charcoal suit. I bent down and scooped Liam up into my arms, holding his small weight securely against my chest. I reached down with my free hand and firmly grasped Leo's fingers. Without saying another word to my parents or my sister, I turned around and began walking toward the front door. The remaining guests actively parted to make way for us, stepping aside with a mix of shock and undeniable respect. Mitchell walked quietly beside me, his presence providing a final, impenetrable shield against any last-minute attempts at manipulation. I walked through the grand foyer, past the shattered pieces of the decorative lamp Donovan had knocked over, and stepped out into the humid summer night. I did not hesitate at the threshold, and I absolutely did not look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, permanently severing my connection to that house and the toxic people inside it. I secured the boys into the back seat of my luxury sedan, making sure they were comfortable before sliding into the driver's seat. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror and watched the imposing colonial estate fade into the darkness. I had established the ultimate ironclad boundary. I was cutting off all contact with my parents and my sister forever. They would no longer have any access to my time or energy. The days and weeks that followed the disastrous welcome home party were a chaotic whirlwind of desperate panic for my family, but I remained completely insulated from their predictable drama. Harrison and Barbara attempted to call me dozens of times from various unknown numbers, leaving pathetic, groveling voicemails, begging me not to foreclose on their home. They pleaded for forgiveness, citing family loyalty and claiming they had seen the error of their ways. I deleted every single message without listening past the first few seconds. I instructed my wealth management team to handle their mortgage with strict, mechanical, clinical precision. I directed my banking executives to send my parents a formal legal notice stating that as long as they made their monthly payments on time, they could remain in the house. However, if they missed a single payment, or if they ever attempted to contact me or the boys again, the foreclosure process would be initiated the very next morning. It was a beautiful, invisible prison. They were allowed to keep their precious suburban facade, but they would have to live every single day with the terrifying knowledge that their despised oldest daughter held their entire fragile world in her hands. Chelsea's reality was far more severe. The local district attorney pursued the credit card fraud charges with aggressive determination. Without the protective financial shield of our parents, who were now completely paralyzed by their own debt, Chelsea faced the full, crushing weight of the justice system alone. She was forced to sell every designer handbag, piece of jewelry, and luxury item she owned just to secure a basic defense attorney and begin chipping away at the massive $28,000 debt she owed to the Azure Pearl Resort. Donovan obviously offered absolutely no help while sitting in federal lockup. The criminal charges resulted in a humiliating plea deal that included extensive probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and a permanent felony record that effectively destroyed her ability to secure a lucrative job or manipulate another wealthy investor. Her glamorous facade was entirely obliterated, replaced by the harsh reality of her own terrible choices. Mitchell handled the family court proceedings with the same ruthless efficiency he had shown in my parents' living room. Given the undeniable mountain of evidence, including the certified airport security logs, the extensive medical evaluations, and the felony fraud conviction, the judge did not hesitate for a second. Chelsea was permanently stripped of all her maternal rights. The court found her to be entirely unfit, and the restraining order was extended indefinitely to ensure the ongoing physical and emotional safety of the children. I sat in the quiet, mahogany-paneled courtroom on the day the final ruling was issued, feeling a profound sense of absolute closure. I had not just rescued Leo and Liam from a life of emotional captivity. I had actively dismantled the generational cycle of narcissistic abuse that had poisoned my family for decades. I walked out of the courthouse, feeling completely and utterly free. 8 months later, the crisp autumn air swept through the vibrant city of Chicago, bringing a refreshing chill that signaled the changing of the seasons. I was sitting on a wooden bench in a beautifully landscaped private park located just a few blocks from my downtown penthouse. The trees were painted in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and the afternoon sun cast a warm, gentle glow across the manicured grass. I was holding a steaming cup of coffee, watching the most important people in my entire world playing happily on the expansive modern playground structure just ahead of me. Leo and Liam were completely unrecognizable from the terrified, malnourished boys I had found sitting by a trash bin at the airport. They had gained healthy weight, their cheeks full and rosy with vibrant life. The dark circles under their eyes had vanished entirely, replaced by the bright, sparkling energy that every child deserves to have. They were currently racing each other down a twisting plastic slide, their joyful, unfiltered laughter echoing across the park. They were no longer afraid of making noise or taking up space. They felt completely safe, secure, and unconditionally loved in their new environment. The formal adoption papers had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier officially, and legally making me their permanent mother. It was absolutely the proudest, most significant achievement of my entire life, far surpassing any corporate promotion or successful investment portfolio I had ever managed in my entire career. I had taken the profound pain of my own childhood and completely transformed it into a powerful protective shield for them. I watched Liam run toward me, clutching a bright red autumn leaf he had found near the slide. "Look what I found, Mom!" he shouted, his face beaming with absolute joy as he reached the wooden bench. I pulled him into a warm hug, finally holding my true family. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that true power does not roar. It operates in the quiet spaces where real work is done. For years, I allowed my family to mistake my silence for weakness and my independence for failure. They built their lives on fragile illusions, assuming that appearances and manipulation could always shield them from accountability. But illusions shatter the moment they collide with reality. I realized that you do not have to accept the narrative toxic people assign to you. When you focus on building your own foundation, whether that is your career, your financial independence, or your emotional resilience, you become untouchable. Blood does not give anyone the right to abuse you, and it certainly does not excuse the abandonment of innocent children. True family is about who steps up to protect you when you are vulnerable, not who shares your last name. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to support you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share your own experiences with toxic family dynamics in the comments below. And remember that you always have the power to